development of this bylaw, such as attendance at many public meetings, reviewing drafts, by proposing bylaw language, and by participating in a downtown sidewalk of the district. I would like to thank both of you and to recognize your efforts with respect to this matter. And now collectively, we, your fellow residents, would look forward to your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Jeff Davis of Horsley Witten, and we also have Nate Kelly of Horsley Witten in this meeting, and Jeff will give the presentation and the analysis and the summary of the draft bylaw that's currently available.
Great. I will see if I can pull up my screen. All right. Can everyone see that first slide?
Yes.
Stoughton Center zoning, realizing our vision. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you, everyone. This has been a really interesting project for us. It's been great working with you all. Sad that we haven't been able to see you much in person, although as Joe and John mentioned, we did get to do a nice block walk back in March as we were finalizing a lot of this first draft. It was great to be back in the community and see what was going on in person. So my presentation is really about walking through the major components of the changes to the zoning, and to the extent that we can, really tying it back to how the feedback that we got from the public and the survey directly informed this draft.
Excuse me, Jeff, I got a question as far as whether or not the screen could be made enlarged or made larger.
I don't know. I'm unfortunately not familiar with this platform, other than what I've done with you.
Let me see if I can work on that.
John, you can suggest to people that they X out of the list of participants. That'll make it bigger.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, so they only see what's being presented. Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, there should be a number of different ways people can view this, and I think you have control at home over.
Yeah, we have a little button that has 3 dots, and if you click on that, it gives different options for changing the layout, full screen, changing the background, all those things. So I'm pretty sure you can do it through that.
Okay. Well, the first issue was related to the name of the district. So the survey responses made it very clear that a name change was needed for the Stoughton Center Mixed Use Overlay District, or as you call it today, the SHMOOD. Over half of respondents preferred the name Stoughton Center District, or SCD. So that is the name that we are using in this draft of the zoning. The next issue was creating sub-districts. So the draft zoning split Stoughton Center into 3 sub-districts: the core, the flex, and the transition. And the map that's on the screen now shows the proposed boundaries of each sub-district. The core is noted in orange, the flex in green, and the transition in blue. So the core, and again, that's that orange portion of the map in the center, allows for taller buildings, greater density, and an emphasis on commercial and institutional uses. Building height and density decrease from the core to the flex, and finally to the transition to be more compatible with neighboring residential homes. The survey then asked what types of uses people thought were most appropriate for certain areas of Stoughton Center. The use table in the draft zoning is far more detailed than what you see on this screen, but it is largely based on the feedback received from the survey as well as from the planning board. In this draft, the town stakeholders decided that most uses should be allowed on any floor of a building. However, residential uses and maker spaces, and we'll have more on that in a minute, are generally not allowed on the ground floor within the core subdistrict, and structured parking is generally discouraged on the ground floor anywhere. Another goal was to minimize the use of special permits, which can add time and money to an application. The draft zoning tries to make it easier to have the uses we want, such as retail and mixed use, and requires special permits only for uses that we want, but that require extra attention and conditions, such as commercial parking or certain entertainment uses that may draw large crowds. Note that site plan review requirements have not changed. Anything that requires site plan review, even if it's allowed by right, will still require site plan review per section 10.6 of the zoning bylaw. The survey then asked people to consider adjusting building height limits. So in many ways, what you have today is a 40-foot, 4-story building height limit. And this limit can often serve as a deterrent to reinvestment in the downtown, because marketable commercial ground floors need to be at least 12 to 15 feet tall. You're effectively making it impossible for commercial and mixed-use buildings to be any taller than 3 stories today. It was interesting to see that keeping today's building height limit was actually the least popular choice. So most respondents were interested in changing what you have today. Many respondents wanted to limit building height near residential districts. So the transition sub-district has been set at 35 feet or 3 stories to respect those residential neighbors. However, in the core and flex sub-districts, building height is proposed to be increased a little bit from 40 feet to 45 feet, again, in order to truly accommodate 4-story buildings. So related to the issue of height, the survey then asked people if you would be comfortable with taller building heights in exchange for community benefits. And about 70% of respondents to the survey were in fact open to this idea. Of those respondents, over 82% said that this would be most appropriate in the core sub-district. So to allow higher buildings in the core in exchange for certain community benefits. So based on this feedback, the SCD zoning is proposed to allow what we're calling an increased height special permit only in the core sub-district. With an increased height special permit, development could be approved up to 65 feet or 6 stories, but with a 10-foot setback required above the 4th story in order to make the building feel smaller from the street. This potential increase of 20 feet in building height is meant to serve as a development incentive. However, a cap of 55 feet or 5 stories is certainly a valid alternative. This added height could only be done if the developer provides one of 3 community benefits, which are based on the most popular options from the survey, which are circled here in red on the slide. And those community benefits are addition of public parking beyond what is otherwise required, a greater front yard to provide landscaping, seating, bike racks, or other similar amenities in front of a building, or finally, contributions to public spaces anywhere downtown. So this could be investments in parks, plazas, sidewalks, crosswalks, or other improvements to public spaces. Parking. Now, parking was among the top issues that people brought up in their comments on the survey, and something that is clearly at the front of most people's minds. The comments that we received suggest that while people understand there is a need for flexibility in parking requirements downtown, they still very much see a lack of convenient and accessible parking as a problem. Over 70% of respondents supported eliminating parking requirements in the core sub-district, but maintaining requirements elsewhere in the district. The draft zoning includes the following major standards for parking, designed to provide adequate space, but also acknowledge the need for flexibility in meeting parking needs. So first, there are no parking requirements for non-residential uses in the core. So for office space, for retail, and so forth, no parking requirements in the core. However, residential parking requirements are no longer based on number of bedrooms, but simply whether you're in a single or 2-family building or a multifamily building. Single and 2-family dwellings still require 1 space per unit. However, multifamily dwellings in the core district would now only require half a space per unit rather than one space. And multifamily dwellings in the flex and transition would still require the one space per unit. And there would be no requirement for guest parking. Now, property owners may continue to offer parking off-site or through shared parking agreements with other property owners. And on this slide, you'll see an example of the parking spaces that would be required for a hypothetical mixed-use building in the core with residential apartments over ground floor retail. So you can see in this instance, it would be a total of 7 spaces for those mix of uses. Maker spaces. So this was something that was interesting that was brought up in the survey. We asked how people felt about maker spaces, and just a quick definition: maker spaces or artisan industries might include 3D printing, handmade glass, wood, or metal crafts, furniture, microbreweries, distilleries, artisan food production, and similar craft production activities. So these spaces can be really important for encouraging entrepreneurship and small business development. It was clear from the survey that people think maker spaces do belong downtown. And in fact, only about 3% of respondents said that these uses did not belong downtown at all. So the draft zoning provides new definitions for artisan production to make sure that heavier production uses, heavier industrial uses, are not allowed, making it very clear that's not what we're talking about here. These uses are proposed to be allowed anywhere in a building in the flex subdistrict. In the core subdistrict, they'd be allowed on the upper stories or in the rear of ground floors. Affordable housing was another topic that is currently required in the SHMUD. And today, it requires 10% of units in developments with 5 or more units be affordable to moderate income households. And in fact, today, this is the only area in Stoughton that currently requires affordable housing. So respondents had a mix of feelings on this policy in the survey, but generally wanted to maintain some amount of affordable housing in Stoughton Center. So based on that, the draft zoning makes the following changes of significance. First, the threshold is now developments of 10 or more units rather than 5 or more units, which was something specifically that was supported by survey responses. Units are also now available to both low and moderate income households rather than just moderate income households. So we're targeting a lower demographic bracket than you currently do. And finally, the affordability requirement would not apply within the core subdistrict. The core subdistrict really has an emphasis on commercial development. And in fact, residential development of any kind is limited to the upper floors. So next, the town really wanted us to create some hypothetical, I wouldn't even call these renderings, but just dimensional examples of what this zoning could produce. So the image here is an example of the scale and features of a building that might comply with the proposed dimensional regulations. Now, it's important to note here that zoning is a menu of options, right? It's not a development proposal. So there are many ways in which a building could be designed and structured to comply with the proposed zoning. What you see here is just one example. This image shows the height, setbacks, and building coverage required in the core subdistrict. And we have hypothetically located this at the corner of Washington and Wyman Streets, just for your reference. We were also asked by the town to do another example based on the increased height special permit in the core subdistrict. So this image shows the height, setbacks, and building coverage required if you were to go as high as 65 feet or 6 stories. We have, again, hypothetically located this on Washington Street, just north of Freeman Street. And so you can see here that this does include the 10-foot setback above the 4th floor. And you can see that the intent of that is to really help minimize the feel of the building from the perspective of a pedestrian on the street. One of the final questions that we asked in the survey regarded design. And based on the responses and comments in the survey, people felt that design of buildings in Stoughton Center is very important. Stoughton already has good design guidelines in the Stoughton Center Design Review Guidelines and Storefront Design Guidelines. This draft zoning references the existing guidelines with the expectation that the planning board will adopt them as regulations in support of the zoning bylaw. So what this means is that the design guidelines will help inform planning board decisions, but not be strict standards in the zoning bylaw itself. Because Stoughton Center is already built out with a wide range in lot sizes and building types, it is difficult to have a set of strict standards that can be applied evenly across all properties. And this is something that we went back and forth on a lot, whether to include design standards directly in the bylaw or to maintain them as guidelines. In addition, the limited market demand for commercial and office use that's very much in existence today means the town needs to be sure that your design guidelines and standards are not a barrier to development. So our goal here really at the end of the day is to get the best design possible without discouraging development. But one area where the town decided that you did want to have design standards, so things a developer has to do, as opposed to design guidelines or things that you're strongly encouraged to do, is signage. So simple signage standards have been added to place a reasonable limit on the number and area of signs, where they can be placed on a building, and how their design can be compatible with the building's design and the design of neighboring buildings and signs. So with that, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. If you have not already and you would like to take a deeper dive into the proposed zoning, you can visit the town website at www.stoughton.org and visit the planning board page on the website. And there you can find a copy of the draft zoning in full. And again, if you have not had a chance to read through the zoning text, would very much encourage you to do so if you're at all interested. And finally, we would love to hear from you. As John noted, the rest of this evening will be dedicated to hearing from you, taking your questions, having a conversation. We have also developed a Survey Monkey. So if you want to make sure that you have some very precise ideas and you want to get them down in writing, the link is up on the screen right now, surveymonkey.com/r/C79XPXD. And that will take you directly to the survey. That link is also on the town's website on the planning board page. So again, encourage you to provide your feedback this evening. On the Survey Monkey, we will keep that link open until June 18th, at which point we will close that and redraft this and come back to you with so we can come back to you with the second draft in September that responds to what we've heard. And yes, I think that's it for now, and look forward to a good conversation. I'll turn it back over to John. And thank you. My colleague Nate has just put the link in the chat if anyone wants to copy that out of the chat box.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'd like to just add to Jeff's presentation comments before we open it up to questions. The draft bylaw that you see before you is actually the fourth version of the draft that has been worked on among the various groups in the sessions that were mentioned before. I just want to emphasize to people that this bylaw, that the job of the consultants and myself is to gain a consensus of what the town wants to see in the regulations. This bylaw isn't any one person's bylaw or any one group or board's bylaw. It's the town's bylaw. So that it's not the consultant's bylaw or my bylaw. So the important thing is to try and gain a consensus of what the town wants, and that's what we're attempting to do. And I'm sure Joe and Mark Zemanian and everybody else who's on this call who participates in the boards that I listed and the groups that I listed will tell you that there's been some very spirited conversations, phone calls, debates on the various aspects of this regulation. So, it's not possible in any bylaw to get every single element of what everybody would like to see individually. So again, the goal is to get something that works for the town as a whole, and gain a consensus. So I would just ask people to keep that in mind as we go through this process and as we receive your comments tonight. So I thank you for your time and your patience through those presentations. And also, if anybody wants to give me a phone call, send me an email at my work email and ask further questions or make further comments about this process and this bylaw, please feel free to reach out to me. Town Hall is now open full time again. So not only by appointment. So I would ask people, if you do want to come in and sit down with me about this bylaw, since it's probably not going to be a 3-minute conversation, I'm guessing, please give me a call and schedule a time to come in and sit down with me so I can spend a good amount of time with you talking about this bylaw. So my office door is open if anybody wants to come in and talk about this bylaw at all. So anyway, with that, I will go to the comments. So I see Pam Carr, I believe, was first, and then I will go to Barbara Ann Zavino and Lou Gito. So Pam Carr, if you could start us off.
Hi, thank you, John. This is Pam Carr. I am Vice Chair of the Redevelopment Authority, as well as the Redevelopment Authority's, my apologies, the Redevelopment Authority's liaison to the Downtown Redevelopment Task Force. So I wanted to thank everybody who came tonight. As John said, there's been a lot of work that has gone into this before this public presentation. But I had a question, and Jeff, I'm wondering if you can put the presentation back up. It might help with others in referencing things for their questions. The slide that I had a question about, it was something that confused me. And as I said, I've been in this process, so it may be something that others had a question about, was the slide where you had an example of the parking on a 4-story building. Thank you. So your example here shows an example in the core, ground floor, 2,000 square feet retail, 1 spot per 600 square feet. However, I thought earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that the bylaw was going to require no spaces for ground floor retail. So if you could just clear up that discrepancy, that would be helpful.
Wow, palm slap. That is a absolute utter mistake on my part. This should have been labeled example in the flex, not the core. You're absolutely right. If this were in the core, those 3 spaces would not be required, and it would just be the residential units that would be required. I'm so sorry for that, Pam. Thank you for that. That's okay. Mistakes can be made, but it's important to clarify them, because I didn't, what you had said didn't jibe with the slide. So I just wanted to make sure, as I said, if I was confused about that, and I am as involved in this process as I am, I'm sure others may have had the question. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Mea culpa. So that slide should read example for the flex district. Great. That was my question. Thank you.
Great. So I would like to, next is Barbara Ann Zavino.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was going through the bylaw, and my question is, when you were talking about giving the 6 stories, so I was referring to 9.3.8 subsection 4. You were talking about the fact that they would have to give you like parking or open space. And what I was confused about, and I don't think it's written well in your bylaw, is who owns the parking? You said that they could give you parking and they could charge a fee, but you didn't go into like who's going to determine the fee or who owns the parking. So are they giving the town the parking?
I think, Jeff, if you could speak to that, I think you may be combining 2 different community benefits with that question.
Well, it's in public parking.
Yeah, it's a fair question. So as written, the only thing that the town would be regulating is that the parking would be fully publicly available. It could be that a developer would choose to donate that parking to the town and have it be run as municipal parking, or they could choose to run it as privately run parking garage or a lot. just so long as it was fully available to anyone in the public and not, specifically used as, the required parking for a business or for residences.
Okay, so just for my own edification, I would like that to be, if possible, to just have something like the fee had to be approved by somebody in the town. Because otherwise they could just, have public parking and say it's going to be $100 a day, knowing that nobody would pay it and then use it for their own guys. So I would like that fee to maybe have a little bit more of a caveat, like, has to be approved by the planning board, has to be approved by the board of selectmen, just some entity in town has to approve the fee.
That is a great point.
Okay, and the other thing, the public space, when you said it was going to be public space, is that going to be, again, who's going to own it? Are they going to donate it? Are they going to keep it? Is that going to be, that's...
So public space would mean that they are making a donation to municipally owned land. So for example, if the town were able to, do a land swap and put aside land for a park downtown, that this would be a financial contribution to actually help build the park, but it would be public land. So
Okay,
that third alternative would strictly be for municipally owned property.
Okay. My other question was, when you're doing the affordables, they're not going to be able to like subdivide, so they can say, oh, this is part A, this is part B, this only has 5, this only has 5. You're going to look at it, they're going to have it combined, right?
So that's
Correct.
actually something that, yes, and if that's something that the town is concerned about, we've actually written language to close that loophole. If that's something that people are afraid of, like if you built 5 units this year and then you come back and you ask for another 5 next year and you don't have to trigger. Yeah. So like if the town is concerned about that, we can write language in that would explicitly prevent that kind of loophole.
Okay, because I would like that. And my last thing is just a comment. I know there's an apartment building down as you're coming in on 138. It's very pretty and it has parking under and everything. But what I had heard anecdotally was that a lot of people were leaving that building and not renewing their lease because there wasn't enough parking. So I didn't know if you had heard that and if that would influence the amount of parking that you wanted to have for residentials. So I just wanted to throw that out there and see if you could investigate that, because it's silly to have apartments that nobody's going to want to rent because you don't have enough parking.
Yeah, Barbara, I haven't heard anything about that. Do you know what the address is? Can you be more specific?
No, it's just that brand new one that as you're coming in right after the Stoughton Plaza.
Is that the Drake at 724 Washington?
It might be. I don't know.
Right at the corner near the bank?
Yeah.
Yes, the one on the corner.
That one.
Okay, so I'll look into that. I will talk to the owner of that and see if that's true.
Yeah, because I just heard some people said that and I wasn't sure. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great questions. So Lou Gito is next, and then I'll move on to Mr. Feaster. So Lou, you are up. Mr. Gito? Are you unmuted, Joe? Lou, rather, sorry. I don't see Mr. Gito's computer, so Mr. Feaster, we will move on to you if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you very much,
We'll come back to Lou Gito.
John, and good evening, everyone. I first want to say thank you to the entirety of the planning board, to you, Mr. Charbonneau, and also to the consultants for some great work. I do zoning in Boston, and so I wanted to be on this call and just to basically say, for what we have been looking at in this town for the 23 years that I've been here, this is a great way for us to begin this process. Generally, I am in favor of most of what has been presented. Only a few comments or questions. I had the same question that Barbara Anzavino had about the parking, and but that has been responded to. I think we need to be careful with the whole question of the landscaping and giving back to the public realm, we have to determine that we have the capacity in order to take care of the parking, or as I've oftentimes said, because of the look of both the downtown and the entryway into the downtown being 138, I think there can be some synergy or some combination by our businesses there in order to help with the beautifications of those areas. I've always been in favor of trees and all of those things along that way. So I would say that if we wanted to begin to look at that, we have to make sure we have the capacity in order to take care of whatever may be provided. I'm always concerned about in terms of how we look, so how the downtown looks. So the idea of looking at setbacks and wider sidewalks and some beautification in that particular area, planters or whatever, would definitely be something that I think we ought to consider. And I would also like to say, we looked at this in Boston, that if you have storefronts, when we get to the era when there's going to be grates and different things on the storefronts, from the security standpoint, if those occur, that we have some regulations in play as to what those can look like, because your downtown can quickly become very unattractive if you don't have the right type of materials for that use. Lastly, on the question of the own affordability, is there, my thinking, and I had this conversation with some others, we talk about affordable housing ownership in the core rather than just rental, that I think that, again, as we begin to talk about trying to make the downtown more user-friendly, we're looking at trying to have people living downtown. And I thought that possibly if we got into home ownership, condominiums, townhouses, things of that nature, that might help that. So I agree with the 10% affordability, but if that could be something that can be discussed as we go forward with the planning. But beyond that, I think that some great headway has been made here, and I appreciate the work that's been done.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Jeff, if I could just reply to the points that Mr. Feaster made. I'll start with the last one first about the rental versus ownership affordability. As it stands right now, I don't believe the bylaw differentiates or dictates whether it needs to be ownership or rental. I think the market would most likely bear that out. So if a developer comes forward with affordable units that are condos or townhouses that can be owned, then that would be wonderful. So I absolutely agree with you. The goal of affordable housing is not just to stay at 10%. The goal of affordable housing is to provide a diversity of housing types for the entire town and diversity of residents. So absolutely, to have both types of housing is essential. So that's something we would definitely be open to. And to work backwards to your point before that regarding contributions to the public realm and being able to take that on and maintain it, what we would like people to realize is within this approval, that these projects would come before the planning board for site plan approval. So during that public hearing process and review process, the planning board has the ability to condition approvals to address things like that. So the regulations provide the foundation. The bylaws provide the foundation and the mechanisms. The planning board has the ability to get into the finer details of a project on a case-by-case basis. So to that point, that discussion would be had at the time, depending on what contribution would be proposed by the developer and agreed to by the planning board. So that's an excellent point. That's something that is definitely going to need to be addressed. We definitely don't want contributions made that go unused or unmaintained. So that's definitely something that is going to be an important factor going forward when projects start going forward potentially and come before the planning board. So absolutely, that's something that's going to be an important consideration. I don't know, Jeff, if you had anything to add to that.
No, I mean, again, I think the way it's written is agnostic to that point. Like you said, John, it's really at that special permit process that those details get pounded out. I mean, again, this with the exception of the public space community benefit, these are things that you could say the private owner needs to continue to be maintain them into the future, and it's not something that the town feels it has the capacity to take over itself. And I think, yeah, again, the way this is written, that would be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about something, Joe, in terms of if you're talking about street trees or benches or something along those lines. Absolutely, we could engage the property owner or property owners in the area to help with the maintenance. Absolutely, I think that would be a great thing, is to partner with the businesses downtown to help maintain some of these amenities. So that's a very important thing. That's a huge thing, and those type of amenities would greatly enhance the downtown, and we want to make sure that those are taken care of. So Lou, Mr. Gito, have you been able to unmute yourself? And
I think I have.
Yes, I can hear you. Great. Go ahead, Lou.
Thank you very much for coming back to me here. I noticed that in the area where the post office is now, that's in the core area, and I was wondering, has the Board of Selectmen made a decision that there's not going to be green space? They're not going to be dealing with the post office anymore?
Not sure if I'm the right person to answer that.
Well, you're the only person here right now, and I guess the reason.
Well, Mr. Gito, hold on. There are also other people on this call. I meant to make that statement before we started with the questions that, depending on the question, the consultant may answer, I may answer, but we also have other people on this forum who can answer that. So, Mr. Scardino, Mr. Zermanian, could one of you shed some light on that?
My understanding was that there was a vote taken with respect to the post office project, and I believe that vote was 4-1, but I could be wrong about that, not to go forward with that, Mr. Gito.
Mr. Charbonneau, if I may.
Yes, sure, Mark, go ahead.
Mark Semanian, 5 Low Avenue. I have to be a redevelopment member. This came before the redevelopment authority, and we were told that all negotiations had ended on the post office. So from our perspective, we're done with it.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mark. So Lou, there's your answer to that question. Any other questions, Lou?
Not right now. There's only one other question, and I guess you are going to cut off your Survey Monkey on the June 18th?
Yes, sir. It's going to be open for 2 more weeks.
And then you're going to, on the basis of what you get in that next 11 days, make whatever changes to the zoning you're interested.
Yes, and also this comment period, the Survey Monkey has been open ever since I began outreach for this public forum. So the Survey Monkey has already been open approximately 3 to 4 weeks going into tonight.
Oh,
and it's going to remain open
okay.
another 2 weeks. So overall, it'll be open about 5 to 6 weeks in total.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Lou. So next, I also saw Pat Colburn, and then we'll move. I'm sorry, Kevin Monahan, and then Pat Colburn. So Kevin, go ahead.
Thanks, John. Kevin Monahan, Precinct 3. I just have a question about if a building is built that's like 65 feet high, does our current fire department equipment, is it able to handle a building that tall, or would we have to get a new ladder truck, or what's that like?
That's actually a very good question.
Mr. Charbonneau, may I?
Yeah.
May I?
Go ahead, Joe. Thank you.
Mr. Monahan, Joe Scardino here. We already have such a building. Most people don't know it. It exists on 100 Technology Drive. We've had that building for over 20 years. It was once the highest taxpayer in the town of Stoughton. So we do have the fire apparatus to deal with that.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Joe. Anything else, Kevin?
No, that was
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So next we'll go on to Pat Colburn. Pat?
Thank you, Pat Colburn, Precinct 4. My question was about the maker space. When you mentioned examples of a craft brewery or maybe, I don't know, like an art gallery, it makes no sense to me that that would be on the upper floors. I was wondering if there was a distinction made between a space like that that would be open to the public versus somebody renting that space as a studio.
That's a good question, and I would have to go back and reread the exact definition. I think where we landed on that is that it was like if you have a retail use or some retail component of what you make, then that is considered a retail use, and that could be that first floor space. You
Yes.
just didn't want the actual production space to be in a retail spot. So yeah, if you make whatever it is, if you're a glass blower, you can have your wares on that first floor in that retail space. You just wouldn't want the actual production to be in that space.
So, see, that just doesn't make sense to me because you need to allow the business to do what the business does. And again, a craft brewery is a perfect example. If they're brewing it and they're selling it to the public, I don't think they should have to have two different spaces. And maybe it's because I'm like a quilter at heart. I think of like a quilt shop or something. I just don't know why we're separating the types of businesses. If you make something, you can't be there. Whereas if you just straight up sell something, you can. So I just wonder if that would limit us to the type of businesses that might go onto that floor.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly valid point, and it's something we actually debated quite a lot. To speak for all the different groups, I think the reason the draft is as it is today is because people thought there's a limited amount of that ground floor, street-facing space, and they want to, make it as active as possible, and not, something that people can go inside and participate, and not a production space. I mean, but you could say that, my production space is part of the allure, and I want people to come in and watch me doing my pottery or what have you. So there are certainly arguments for both ways.
And last comment, the reason I say this is because we have so many vacant storefronts in this town. I would hate to see us, especially starting out, turning down an opportunity because it didn't fit the narrower guidelines. I get maybe why you would do that if space was a premium, but it has not been yet. So I just don't want to see us from the get-go do anything short-sighted that still might, bring people to the center. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And so, Pat, I just want to let you know, and everybody know, I'm making notes. I know Jeff is making notes. We're recording the meeting. So whatever comments we get back tonight, we are going to discuss these and definitely take the comments into consideration, and that will help influence whatever changes we make to the bylaw. So thank you so much, because this will help us greatly, because this is the first time the public's actually commented on the draft bylaw. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Mark Zemanian, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Charbonneau. And if I could just briefly follow up with Pat Colburn's comment, it was an excellent one. We don't want to limit, the local artisans in particular, but I noticed in the chat that Pam Carr had said, and I'll quote from the chat, I believe the decision was that the production could be in the back of the ground floor space with retail operation in the front of the same space. I agree 100%. I think that's an intelligent way to do this. So if we could make sure that is more perhaps clearly defined, that would be really helpful. And if I could just briefly touch on when it comes to the core, I would very much like to see the affordable housing policy of the 10% requirement come back into the core. The reason is multifaceted. The town is currently in the process of considering an affordable housing trust, and that is meant to provide more housing for the discrepancy within the job markets and those who are paid a lot less in the service industry than some other professionals, and still give those folks an opportunity to live and work in the same town if they so choose. So and where the town is redeveloping, more actively than ever, and will continue to do so as the town grows, I think it's important to remember the affordable housing aspect of that and bring it forward whenever possible. So from my perspective, I would like to see that go back into the core. And I did appreciate and love Joe Feaster's idea about ownership. From my standpoint, we have talked a number of years now at town meeting about the possibility of having senior housing. And although I know that that isn't something that you can blend into this now, I certainly think it's something that the town is going to be looking at in the near future. So while we're writing this now, maybe we can include that as something for the future so that the new senior housing bylaw, if we do write one, would blend in well with this.
So, Mark, those are really great comments, and I absolutely agree with you. I think one of the things that has been made clear as we've gone through this process of this bylaw and other bylaws, that the one that was presented by citizen petition at the last town meeting, one of the things that we're learning through this process are some of the things that need to be addressed as a priority after this bylaw is hopefully approved. And senior housing is right at the top of that list. There was discussion within the last couple months about incorporating senior affordable housing into the core. However, after a conversation with town council, I was advised that that would not be legally acceptable. You can't relegate or specify that affordable housing has to be for seniors. It has to be, you have to open it up to all age groups. So, this is something that's going to warrant a lot more discussion going forward. It's going to be something that's the town's, again, going to have to decide, where they want the senior housing, what type of senior housing, how they want to see it, age groups, level of activity, things of that nature. So absolutely, that's going to be right at the top of the list coming out of this project, is to start a discussion about a senior housing bylaw. I think it's definitely well overdue.
And I will just add very quickly that there's nothing in the way this is written today that would preclude age-restricted housing from going in right now. I just, as John said, the town council didn't feel you could require it, but it's certainly something that someone could do now.
Correct. That's a great point, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you both, John and Jeff, for those answers. One other thing that's sort of niggling at me a little is open space was talked about in parking as alternatives for density bonuses for the developers. Just want to make sure that, and I think it was partially covered, maintenance will be an issue. The town, when it takes on or purchases open space, often struggles with the maintenance aspect. Given that this is directly in our downtown center, I think it would be great to have something in there that sort of defines who is going to take care of that maintenance. That way, over time, boards change and so on and so forth. Just want to make sure that that's covered in the long term with developers, so they can't feign ignorance and say, well, I don't see it in the bylaw anywhere, so not my responsibility. If that's the intent of this, that's all.
So Jeff, I will ask you in response to that question, because I'm not positive about this. Is that something that is normally handled at this level of regulation, or is that something that is usually discussed on a case-by-case basis by the approving board? Either Nate or Jeff, if you could answer that.
Definitely. So, I mean, it's going to be just determined case by case based on what the town feels they have the capacity to do with the proposal. But, one thing we certainly could add is simply that for any community benefit, there has to be an agreement that details the long-term maintenance of what's being offered, period. Just so that whatever the decision is, you do still have the requirement that has to be put in writing in an agreement.
Hey, Mark, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, it certainly defines it. And I thank you both for your time and everybody for their time. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. So next on the raised hand list now, Pat Colburn, I see your hand is still up. If it's still up, I will come back to you after, but thank you. Michael Hardman is the next on the hand up list.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and all. Mike Hardman, Precinct 8, Stoughton Disabilities Commission. Besides the requirements of the American Disabilities Act, what other considerations are being made in the zoning and the constructions for people with disabilities?
Right now, nothing. I think that is one of the, much like with senior housing, as you know, as your consultant, I would advise that you deal with accessible housing and visitability on a comprehensive basis town-wide. I don't think that's something that should only apply within downtown. So we try, like, that's a completely valid concern. I would encourage the town to tackle it on a town-wide basis.
Also, Jeff, to add to your comment, I believe whenever a developer comes forward, and we've seen, several new buildings go up on Monk Street and Porter Street and the Drake at Washington Street, and obviously with the recently approved Malcolm Parsons building, demolition and reconstruction. Certainly whenever a project comes before the planning board and it's approved, they have to meet ADA requirements. That's definitely something that is addressed at the review level at the time. And certainly anytime a project comes forward, the building commissioner comments on every project that comes before the planning board. So I believe that's something that's handled at that time. So I agree with Jeff. The town could address this on a comprehensive basis, but also it's addressed on a case-by-case basis. Whenever a project comes forward, ADA requirements they need to meet ADA requirements.
Just because I like the idea of the benches downtown, but I'm worried if that will be tough for people to get around and negotiate.
Oh, absolutely, Michael. That conversation came up when we talked about signage and sandwich boards, and it came up when the select board approved their temporary outdoor dining. Is absolutely whatever the case may be, Michael. We would never incorporate anything or approve anything that violates ADA or restricts access for people with disabilities of any kind. So that's a great question, and that's always something that's going to remain in place no matter what. So that's something we always have to meet.
Well, thank you, John and Jeff, for your presentation and answer my question. I appreciate it.
Thanks, you,
Michael. So Joe Feaster, I'll come back to you if your hand is still raised. I would like to get to Mr. Cohn because he would like to ask a question for the first time.
Thank you, Mr. Charbonneau. I can wait. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe.
Question. Your stories of going 65 feet high and recessing, how many buildings in town do we think this can be done? I'm looking and thinking 3 buildings. 2 buildings and 1 empty lot. Am I wrong or am I right?
I'd have to look at the individual lots, Bob. I would guess you're probably right. I'm
looking at the railroad station. Across from there, there's an empty lot there. I know there were plans filed, but can he personally refile to go into this type of construction?
Now, what property is that in particular, Mr. Cohn? Is that in the core sub-district or is it in the transition? Or the
It's on the other side of the railroad tracks. Is that where the railroad station crossed the railroad tracks, and there's a big lot of land sitting right
Yeah, is that the
there. Hersey property.
That's the Hersey So, okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. That is in the flex zone, so that could not go up to 65 feet. No, that couldn't reach that height in the flex zone, Mr. Cohen.
Let me ask you, the Stoughton Theater, can that be I'm only giving some, I don't know what the man has planned, but suppose that building comes down. Is that in the area, may I ask?
Yes, that is in the core subdistrict. That would be a possibility. And what I would like to remind people of that Jeff pointed out is in his presentation, in the core subdistrict, 6 stories, 65 feet is only by special permit. It's not allowed by right. So on a case-by-case basis, well, first of all, no, people, a developer doesn't have to go up to 65 feet.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, it's not a foregone conclusion. It would be by special permit. And so a developer may come in and decide that that's not feasible for their proposal. And also the planning board may decide it's not appropriate for the location. So I just want to remind people that it's not a by right proposal. It's by special permit. So I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen, go ahead.
I have one more question. Is this going to be a walking area when this is done with stores and crossing streets and all that? When this is totally done or partially done, are these going to be people parking their car and walking around like they do in Norwood on a smaller scale?
Joe Scardino, could you, I believe pedestrian accessibility is a long-term goal to enhance pedestrian access and pedestrian accessibility. But Joe, could you verify that? I believe the goal is to make this more pedestrian friendly in the long term.
Yes, I know there's, this proposal does not include, for example, if you're thinking, Mr. Cohen, of making Wyman Street pedestrian free. That's not in this iteration.
No, wasn't talking about that. I was talking about the main drag of people parking when this thing gets going to go from shop to shop. A lot of communities, on the biggest scale, you can look at Needham. You can get out of your car and you can go shopping from one area. You can even do it in Canton too. The only thing I'm trying to bring is in the center of Stoughton is flashing lights. Right. And anyone knows to cross that street, your life is in danger. And I'm just waiting, and God forbid, I hope it doesn't happen. Someone's going to get killed there.
Right.
Flashing lights, no one pays attention to.
Right. So Bob, that's a really excellent point, because whenever you look at the downtown area, and downtown Bridgewater is a great example near the college. Also, the center of Rentham, where they have the angled parking spaces. And I remember when I worked in Rentham, from my office window, I could see between Town Hall and the intersection of Route 1A and Route 140 in Rentham, approximately 6 crosswalks. And there's one crosswalk in particular going from the curb cut where the Cumberland Farms is across Route 1A that is tremendously long with no break. So the point being that people tend to stop and shop and frequent an area where they feel safest, where they could park safely and walk safely. So as I've told everyone from the beginning, this zoning, this is the foundation. The zoning are the regulations that allow the type of development that the town wants. Once you have the zoning in place, you can start working on those other things, those other safety amenities, those other public amenities. So absolutely, that's something that's going to be a long-term goal. Whether it's, I know Joe Feaster mentioned wider sidewalks. That's a topic that's come up in conversations as we draft this bylaw. Is the town more interested in having more green space, or could that public space be wider sidewalks to make it more pedestrian friendly? Well, so that's something that is going to be a conversation going forward.
Why did we dig up the center of Stoughton, spent $2.5 million to redo Stoughton Center, and all these ideas are great? I'd love to see the sidewalks wide and have the outdoor. It's the thing that's happening now that people never thought would happen. Our sidewalks now could never possibly take something unless we put a barrier closer to the street. But my thing is, we should have started this first and then come back and find out what we're going to do with the streets and the sidewalk. Because we're going to start tearing up the town again. We already did it 2 years ago, 2.5 million. And it's not your fault. I'm trying to bring back, let's get this project started, then come back and put the stuff that sidewalks, streets, crossings and stuff like that.
No, it's an
And
excellent point,
Mr.
Bob.
Cohen, just to mention, one of the things that the existing bylaw provides for is one of the public benefits is public space. So the developer, in exchange for a 6-story building, could in fact pull the building from the front of Washington Street and expand the sidewalk voluntarily as his community benefit.
Good idea.
So we're not going to spend. There's ways to do this without spending millions again.
Okay.
Right.
And the bylaw provides that incentive in situations like that.
I just want to say, Mr. Scott, I've been looking at downtown. There's not a lot of property you could push back. These buildings are put pretty close together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Feaster, you have another question or comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Charbonneau. And I think I'm glad to see the focus so much on the downtown and the beautification aspects of it. And like Mr. Scardino said, there are development ways in which we can respond to that. So that's great. What I failed to mention was the question. There had been much discussion about expanding the core area down to Rose Street, and it went down partially of Wyman Street. Is there any reason why we would not include going down to at least to the train tracks, or at least to the Stoughton Depot, as being within the core area? We have all those buildings that are on the, if you will, the east side of the track. And I was wondering why we didn't include those, or wouldn't consider including them into the core.
Joe, that's an awesome question. I'm glad you asked that, because that was considered. There was a lot of lively debate on that at the downtown task force meetings, and the site walk that was conducted. And certainly Mr. Scardino, Mr. Davis, and Mr. Zemanian and Ms. Carr were all on that site walk that we did throughout the downtown area, and that conversation was had on that site walk. The reason we decided not to go down Wyman Street to the railroad tracks was there were several reasons. One of which being that the regulations as proposed, the differences between the flex area and the core area are basically building height. In other words, there's nothing preventing a mixed-use building from going into the flex area down Wyman Street. So the only difference was really the building height. The uses aren't drastically different. The only thing is, if you extended the core down to the train tracks, now what you have in place is a developer can't have, first of all, a 100% residential building, but it limits what they can do on the floors. So if we extended the core down to the train tracks, they would have to put commercial on the first floor and residential on the upper floors. They could not put any residential on the first floor. Also, we were very aware of not potentially creating a situation where you have 6-story buildings going all the way to the train tracks. People seem to not be very supportive of that for a variety of reasons, and one of which being that you could potentially have a 6-story building put between Washington Street and the train depot that would obscure the beautiful historic train depot. So that could potentially be redeveloped and reused. So certainly Joe Scardino, Mark Zemanian, Pam Carr, Jeff Davis, please chime in with your comments and thoughts on this. But that was my recollection, that was debated and discussed, but ultimately it was decided that extending the core area down to the railroad tracks was not in the best interest of the town.
Mr. Charbonneau, you've answered my question with that stellar team that you had doing on the walk with you. I don't need any further answer. I'm convinced,
and I believe, and I don't want to
that the great minds have made the greatest decisions. So I withdraw my question, sir.
Yeah, great, because I know, for instance, I don't want to speak for her, but I remember a comment made by Ms. Carr on that walk was she was initially in favor of extending it down to the train tracks, but once we got out and walked and actually looked at the neighborhoods, her opinion was actually changed as a result of that site walk. So I'm glad you asked, because that was a large issue that was debated quite a bit.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. I am persuaded the right decision was made. Thank you.
And if I,
Thanks, Joe.
Mr. Feaster, one other point on that, and that is, it fits well with the core as it stands because the town hall is some 80 feet tall. And so we didn't want to obscure that building. That's considered also number 2 sacred cow in the center of Stoughton. So just like the train station was treated the same way, the core district, the 65-foot building, is not going to interfere with the visual sight lines of the town hall.
Great.
I just, this is Pam Carr. I'm sorry, I don't have my camera on. It's chaos in my house, but I did want to reiterate that John is correct. You know, a lot of this, when we went on the site walk, when you actually walk around and you're on the ground and you see what we're talking about, it actually did help to solidify some opinions, but also change some opinions. And one of my concerns with regards to putting the core districts to be all the way down Wyman Street, which initially sounds like it would be correct, is that, we have put a lot of time and effort and money into this train depot building. And we want to be able to preserve that as a visual of Stoughton Center. And with some of these potentially 6-story buildings could change that. The other part is that right near the train station there, if that is part of the flex zoning, there is the possibility to have more residential versus commercial, which is good for a transit-oriented development. So it was twofold.
Oh, excellent point, Pam. Thank you for adding that.
yeah, and if I could jump in, John, as well, Mark Semanian here. I'm in agreement with Pam. I think we were both in favor initially of the 6 stories, but being on the ground and seeing what it would potentially do to, the train station, how it looks, even perhaps our accessibility to it, it changed my mind, and I'm really glad we had that conversation. And I'm hopeful that our residents will see that the same way. Be very interested to see what folks say on the Survey Monkey, because I think it's a great question we all grappled with. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe, for that question. I'm really glad that you asked that question and gave us a chance to explain the thought process and the discussions that happened. So Pat Colburn has another question. Pat?
Yes, thank you. I forgot to ask earlier. It's similar to Joe Feaster's question about if we ever need to put grates up on businesses. As far as I know, we don't have zoning that makes people maintain their property. And I know we tried to pass one years ago at town meeting and it was shot down, but is there something in this bylaw? Could it be added that makes people maintain it so that you don't have broken windows, boarded up windows, all kinds of stuff not pleasant to look at, the hole in the ground that burnt and it's been there for years? Is there anything that we're planning to make sure that whoever owns these buildings has to maintain them?
Pat, that's a good question, and I will, I'll ask Jeff to respond to that as well. But I just wanted to give, and also Mr. Scardino, as the planning board chair, can also respond to this question. Maintenance of private property is always a very dicey thing. I know one of the points of emphasis of the planning board since I've been working for the town has been landscaping in particular. Businesses along Route 138 like Burger King and Harbor One Bank and O'Reilly Auto Parts, quite a bit of work and conversation and effort has been put into landscaping and making these properties look attractive. However, I've run into this in other towns where and this town where you get pushback from the private developer because their attitude is that it's private property and the town really doesn't have any right to tell them how to maintain their property because it's not town property. So it tends to be a delicate balance because at the end of the day, it is private property. So it's something that the planning board has addressed in different forms, especially when it comes to landscaping. And it's a very dicey thing, and it's a tricky thing to do through zoning. So I know Joe Scardino has his hand raised. So Joe, you wanted to respond to that?
Yes. One of the things that we do, Pat, is we require color elevations and facade materials, and we try to encourage more permanent facade material that doesn't require a frequent painting. Most of the buildings going up have use of what's called a hardy plank board or similar that has a 25 to 30 year life on the finish. And so we try to encourage that type of building material in the design process. That's the Malcolm Parsons, all three of the projects, 2 on Monk Street, and 1 on Porter Street, all have those type of materials. As for a broken window, there's really nothing. I mean, it all went. You know, they break and they call the emergency crew and they put a piece of plywood up, and you know that. But we try to get involved with the selection of the building materials. The bank has tile. Other places have stone. They become less susceptible to New England winters and to lack of outside maintenance.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Jeff, do you have anything to add in terms of, from the perspective of putting together zoning bylaws? Oh, Nate, I see Nate has a comment.
That was actually what I was just about to say. This is another one of those issues where you don't want, you know, standards or enforcement mechanisms specific to Stoughton Center. That's going to be elsewhere in your general bylaws. It's generally not something that is handled by zoning, but basically, you know, building code and enforcement. And it really becomes a matter of how aggressive you want to be in enforcing that and how much capacity you have at the staff level to do so.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah. If I might, it's just in terms of my point of information, just in response to Patricia's question, I think Jeff hit it right on the head. That's a building code issue that should be taken in place. That's something that when I was the interim town manager wanted to push for, to strengthen what the building department can do as far as that. So Patricia, I think that's where we have the enforcement to make it, is not a zoning matter.
Absolutely.
I agree, Joe. I think we all know, though, that it's not being done. There are a lot of buildings that I'm just trying to be delicate here.
No,
that it would be nice if
that's
the owner
a great
is
question.
not
It's a good point.
willing to do what they need to do to remove a boarded window. You know, I would like to see the town, I guess, focus more in that direction. I just hoped, I knew it wasn't the case. I just hoped there was something in here I missed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So, Mr. Cohn, do you have another question, or is your hand up from previous? Mr. Cohn? Okay.
I put it up by mistake a second time. No, I have no other. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks you, Bob. So I don't see any other hands raised or any other requests to speak. So
I have a request.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Is this Miss Walsh?
Yes, Cynthia Walsh. I don't have a computer,
Okay.
so I'm on the phone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
I live at 1096 Park Street, which is obviously more than 2 miles from the square, but I have lived in Stoughton and used the square for the last, well, I guess it's 72 years. I want to thank Mr. Charbonneau for making sure that I got all of the materials, since I can't print them out at home. But I wanted to echo something from a previous speaker, and that's the sidewalks. Anyone in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller has a real difficult time navigating Stoughton Square. There are telephone poles, light poles, electrical boxes, trees. And what I'm afraid of is if we say, well, you have this wide sidewalk, and then they decide to put in a flower box or they put in a bench, all of that can cut down on the travel way. I know that most people don't do a lot of walking, but I don't drive, and I do walk around the square. And there are places currently in the square on the sidewalks where people can't pass each other comfortably. Someone has to step off the curb or onto somebody's yard. So even though for the average person, I don't think it's a big deal, we have to recognize that up on Pleasant Street, we have senior housing on one side, and then assisted living on the other side, and that there are people in Stoughton that do use wheelchairs. We're lucky enough to be on the BAT bus line. The BAT buses are equipped with ramps so people can get on and off but the bus stop has to be accessible. So even though the average person probably doesn't think of it, other than your previous speaker and myself, we do have to think of everyone. Making a curb cut isn't helpful if once you get on the sidewalk, you can't get between the tree and the telephone pole. Obviously, anything that we do to improve the square after the failed schmood, everyone will appreciate. And I think that, as a previous speaker said, in my lifetime, I guess we've dug up the square about 12 times. The state always gives us the money, but then they insist on their planners and their engineers, when our own people know the town and they know the kind of folks we're talking about. And so ultimately, whatever they design might technically be correct according to all of the manuals. It isn't Stoughton specific, and we do need to think about that. I'm hoping that once we get back to in-person meetings, that more of us will be able to turn out and judge these plans so that we can speak up for the average person. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for those comments, and I'll just repeat what I said, how I responded to Mr. Hardman's question regarding ADA compliance. It's absolutely of the utmost importance, and whenever a project comes before the planning board, whether it's sidewalks or landings or signage or pavement markings, the police department in particular is excellent. One of the comments I routinely get from the police department is with regards to handicap parking signage and handicap pavement markings. And certainly when it comes to the access and egress in and out of the building and within the building, that's a state building code and ADA matter. So those things are addressed on a case-by-case basis. And like I said, what we're trying to do, everyone acknowledges we have bylaws that don't work right now. It didn't take me long to review the bylaws that are in the zoning bylaws. When I started to see why they don't work, it became evident within just a few minutes of reading. So what we're trying to accomplish with this is we're trying to provide the flexibility, not just for the developer, but I think the balance we're trying to strike with this bylaw is providing guidance for developers and guidance for the planning board, but also some flexibility for both, because I know Mr. Scardino mentioned building facades and the materials. This bylaw will give flexibility to the planning board to work with the developer on their project but at the same time adhering to design standards, but giving some flexibility to both to work together to come up with a design and appearance that really is within the character of the town and will be attractive. And as I've emphasized to people since I started, it's very, very important. Towns make the mistake a lot of times of zoning for what they want to prevent to come into an area or a town. It's more important to create zoning for what you would like to attract, and go from there. It works a lot better. So a lot of times when you try to zone in a preventative way to prevent something, you end up creating unintended loopholes. And Route 1 in Rentham was a prime example. So what we're trying to do is give some flexibility and guidance to allow for the type of development that the residents want to see. So is there anybody else who has a question or comment before I make some closing comments?
I had one more comment.
Sure, go ahead, Cynthia.
To a previous speaker, I think she'll be pleased to know that at the last selectmen's meeting, Dr. Grimm announced that they had hired the enforcement officer
Yes.
for the building department. And I think we're hoping that person hits the ground running.
He has, Cynthia. He has actually been in our office in engineering quite a bit since he started early in the week. So He's very visible. He's very active. His name is Dana. He's a very, very nice guy, and from what I understand, really knows his stuff.
Good. Thank you.
Anybody else? Great. So just in closing, I want to thank everybody. This was really an awesome forum. I'm really happy that everyone turned out and asked the questions and made the comments they did. Again, I'm certain that people are probably going to have questions coming out of this that they didn't think of at the moment, or in doing further review of the bylaw may have subsequent questions after this. Please, the Survey Monkey will be open until the 18th, so take advantage of that. Or send myself an email, or give me a phone call, or stop by in person. Please try to make an appointment so I can dedicate the time to sit with you if you'd like. And it's something that I can get to the consultant, or to the, we can definitely discuss all these comments and any comments we get when this is reviewed by the planning board and the downtown task force and the working group. So this has been really excellent. And Jeff or Nate, do you have anything to add before we sign off for the night?
No, just thank you. This was really great, and I appreciate that. I think literally every question that came up was something that we had in fact grappled with, and there are a bunch of ways that we can go with this, but I feel like we're narrowing in on a pretty good solution for the community, and that's gratifying.
Excellent. So I'd like to thank Pam Carr, Mark Zamani, and Joe Scardino in particular for being on this call, so they could help Jeff and myself and Nate answer questions that we may not have full answers to. So I really appreciate you guys jumping in and verifying information and answering questions. Thank you. So excellent. So like Jeff said, we will come out of this. We will take your comments and your questions that also come in over the next couple weeks, and we will incorporate them into this bylaw as appropriate. And we will schedule our next public forum sometime in early September. So keep an eye out for that. And like I said, please don't be afraid to reach out to me with questions or comments between now and then. So thank you, everybody, and I wish everybody a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, John.